Hello and welcome to the Back to Jerusalem live podcast. We're excited for those that have chosen to join us this morning. It's Saturday morning where we're at in the U.S. and I want to say good morning to our American friends, good afternoon to our European friends, and good evening to those of our friends that are in Asia. If you would like to call, we have our number listed on our website. You're more than free to call at any time during this podcast. I will put it up on our Back to Jerusalem website. And let me just get it up on our screen here so that those that would like to call, you're more than welcome to call during this time. Our main focus during this live podcast will be what's taking place right now inside of China. And it's a big deal. What we are seeing right now inside of China is a big deal with the meetings. This is a really big week. So if you're a Christian and you're praying for Back to Jerusalem, you're praying for the Underground House Church, this is a week that we're asking for you to please hunker down in that prayer closet and begin to pray for the Back to Jerusalem missionaries. Because this week, the National People's Congress is meeting together in Beijing. They've come from every province inside of China to the capital city of Beijing, and we are asking you to pray for these lawmakers. Pray for the lawmakers, pray for the president, pray for the premier, pray for those representatives to do the right thing and to be led by God, because the laws that are coming out of this particular Congress is a big deal. I mean, we're already seeing it right now. For anybody that's watching from Hong Kong or listening to this live podcast from Hong Kong, you know that this is directly affecting your life. Unfortunately, there are so many people that are listening to this podcast from other parts of the world that do not realize how much China is actually impacting their life. I just got a message from Michael Zhuang. Michael, I'm just going to write to him really quick. He's asking, how do we call in? It's really easy. You could call in by calling 1-703-348-7756. Michael, we would love to hear from you. It is up. It is on the screen right now. I just saw that if you're leaving a comment, you're probably seeing it as we are doing it live. So I've just put up the number for you. If you want to call, you're more than welcome to call at 1-703-348-7756. This morning, my main focus is going to be the situation that we're seeing in China as it unfolds. Because this is a big deal. And it doesn't matter if you're in America, it doesn't matter if you're in Taiwan, it doesn't matter if you're in Europe. What we're seeing coming out of this Congress is going to impact everyone. Most of the people do not know that right now, as we're doing this podcast, there are military ships that are in the South China Sea that are starting to come in contact with one another. We just had another incident this past week where the U.S. naval ships were trying to defuse the situation with Chinese naval ships. The U.S. Navy is now in the waters of the South China Sea. They have been for a while, been reporting about that for a while. But what we are seeing that is different is that the U.S. government is now supporting Malaysia with military equipment to be able to help protect their own waters. This is obviously going to make a big deal. This is going to be a big thing for China. We just saw that Taiwan now has they just had their new election with their president, and the U.S. congratulating them. That ticked off China. How much will the U.S. actually do to continue pushing that agenda with Taiwan? We saw that the WHO just came together. They just had a big meeting where China basically said, we are open to investigations. We are open to investigations after this coronavirus problem has subsided. So if you've been watching the news lately, there's a lot of stuff that we want to share with you to kind of unpack it a little bit. It might seem a little confusing. Not everybody knows all the details about China, and that's understandable. So let me just kind of start sharing a little bit about what's taking place in China right now. First of all, Everybody from around the country, from China's 31 provinces, flew in, all the different representatives. So when you look at China, China is basically like this big military unit, right? You have at the very top of the pyramid scheme, you have President Xi. And he's more than a president. He's like, you could consider him to be like Chairman Mao, a Führer, like, or any sort of dictator system. That's what you have with President Xi right now. He's at the very top of this pyramid. And then under him is the whole Politburo of Chinese leaders in the communist system. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible for everybody to understand, because I get it, right? Most people don't even know what's happening in American politics. American politics, with all the representatives, the different chambers, with the Senate, the Supreme Court, the balance of powers between the different branches. And then when you start looking at the Europe with the monarchy and the parliaments and the balance of power that they have between the two, some countries have a monarchy, some countries do not. Most of the countries have a parliamentary system. And then inside of that, you also have this big kind of umbrella organization that goes over all of that called the EU, or the European Union. And then from there, you also have, the bigger, larger United Nations. And so I understand it. It may not exactly fit in with everything that you have to worry about every day. And that's why I want to make it as easy as possible to understand. So if you are listening to this podcast and you're wondering what's going on right now in China that is such a big deal and why you need to be praying, I'm going to try to tell you the best that I can. It's not the easiest system. So there are professionals that are probably political experts in China that are listening to this, and they're thinking that, I personally think that you're wrong, Eugene. I don't agree with what you're saying on this. I don't agree with what you're saying on this. There's going to be a lot of things that people will not agree with when I am speaking about China politics. But what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to make it super simple. So it may not be in depth. You may, as a listener, might be more educated in Chinese politics and disagree with me. I'm just going to give the very bare bones basics for our prayer partners who are praying about the Chinese meetings that are taking place inside of Beijing right now. Now, these meetings these are annual meetings. They take place every year where the government from the 31 different provinces from around the country come together, meet together inside of China. This was actually supposed to be planned already in March. But in March, because of the coronavirus, they were postponed, and they were postponed until May 21st, when everybody arrived just 2 days ago. Most people arrived before that, but basically you had to be there on Thursday. Thursday was the deadline for everybody to arrive. And these meetings usually take place for a period of about 10 days. So consider it to be a special congressional session. Now, most governments have their Congress. They meet all year round, and Beijing also has that. But this is where you have all the delegates from all around the country coming together, getting on the same page, so they're in lockstep with one another as they carry out the Communist Party's agenda in their part of the country. China is a massive place, all right? It's bigger than the EU. It's bigger than the United States. It's a massive country. Most of the time when people think of China, they're thinking small little place, maybe a bigger place, but not that big, right? I mean, maybe you can drive, like for instance, I'll often get people that will talk to me about China, and they'll say, "Oh, hey, my cousin Amy lives in Beijing. Do you know her?" That's like if I live in the Czech Republic and you have a brother that lives in Manchester, and I just randomly say, "Hey, I know your brother who lives in Manchester because I live in the Czech Republic. Because I live within the EU, I know your brother who lives in Manchester." China is the same way. I mean, you might be like, well, the Czech Republic and England are two completely different languages, two different cultures, two different history backgrounds. Everything about them is different. That's the exact same way as you find inside of China. The northeastern part of China is as different from southwestern China as Italy is from Sweden, as Iceland is from Greece. Different language, different, everything. Different food, different economy, different, government system, different religion. It's about as different as you can get when you're looking at the size of China. When we're looking at the 31 provinces, the people from these different provinces don't often get to go to Beijing except for these meetings. These are the very top leaders. And most of the people that serve in Western China are not from Western China. So this would be like, let's say that you got the EU, right? And with the EU, you have this base kind of set up. Let's say that within the base, the EU decides that they need new leadership in Italy. So they send two guys from Norway down to Rome to run Italy. That's kind of like the Chinese system is right now. You have people that are serving in Xining, people that are serving in the capital of Lhasa, people that are serving in Urumqi. And there you have people that are running the government, making the decisions of people's everyday lives that are not from that culture, not from that area, don't speak that language, do not share one drop of history in common with the local people, and yet run it. So China's mainly made up, when I'm talking about the Communist Party, now there are exceptions to the rule, yes, but I'm mainly talking about the Han Chinese people. And the Han Chinese people are appointed by the government to run these different parts. And they have come together for this massive meeting inside of China. And right now, these meetings usually last for about 10 days, a little bit more than a week, about a week and a half. But I plan for this one, I'm guessing that this meeting is probably going to be shorter. I've been hearing that from a lot of different news outlets inside of China. And one of the reasons why is because of the coronavirus, people want to limit their exposure of being in a big room together. And so people arrived on May 21st. They're taking the needed precautions that they need to take in order to make sure that people aren't getting sick unnecessarily. And my guessing is that they're going to probably cover this entire meeting in a shorter time span than the 10 days that they usually have. So this meeting is taking place. Where is it? Where's the meeting taking place? It's taking place in Beijing. It's taking place at the Parliament Great Hall of the People. If you've ever been to Tiananmen Square, basically if you are facing north, it is going to be to your left. It'll be the building on your left-hand side. It is west of the Tiananmen Square. And it's a massive auditorium that seats about 10,000 people. And the Tiananmen Square is supposed to be, this is the gates of heaven. That's the peaceful gates of heaven, Tiananmen. This is the peaceful gates of heaven. And when you go to Tiananmen Square, this area was specifically designed to intimidate, as most capitals are, right? Most capitals are designed to specifically intimidate foreign delegations, and that's what we have in Beijing. That's where this 13th National People's Congress, the NPC, is taking place. So they're taking place at the Great Hall of the People on the west side of Tiananmen Square, this big building that if you've ever been to Tiananmen Square, you've seen it. Most of the time, people that go to Tiananmen Square face the Forbidden City. Their main focus is on the Forbidden City. If you look up Tiananmen Square, the number one icon or image that you get for Tiananmen Square is usually Mao Zedong on this big frame mounted above the gate leading into the old Forbidden City. And that was done to kind of remove a lot of the history that came along with the idea of there being an emperor, a monarchy, a god king that was in charge of the people in Beijing. And that's why the Forbidden City was built for the emperor. It was forbidden to all people that were not a part of the royal court. And Mao Zedong put his picture on that, and it remains there today. As long as the Communist Party is in charge, his picture remains on the wall, remains above the main gate. But if you are facing that, if you're in the area, if you've ever gone to a flag raising ceremony, it usually takes place before sunrise every single day. You can go there. It's a pretty amazing event that you can go to every single day. I actually worked with young kids at a camp in Beijing 20 years ago. And I was studying at the Beijing Language and Culture University during that summer. And what I would do is I volunteered at a summer camp with young kids, and I would take them. One of the things that I did was I took them to the flag raising ceremony early in the morning. Beijing, watch the flag go up. If you're watching that flag go up, you're on the side of the street, because there's a big, massive street that goes straight through the middle of Tiananmen Square. And with that big street, on one side is the Forbidden City to the north, and then to the south is where you have the Great Hall of the People. And you also have the museum where the body of Mao Zedong is laid. And it is here, this auditorium, massive auditorium that can fit about 10,000 people. This is the main seat of power, the government of China. And you have two groups of people that are meeting here, two bodies. One is the National People's Congress, and the other one is the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which is the CPPCC. This is a group of non-elected officials. They're all really non-elected officials, but they're government officials. This is a group of people that are business people, investors, family, relatives, no real power, but they're a part of the ceremony and they have influence. And the main influence takes place with about 10 to 12 different families inside of China that are a part of the Communist Party. The Communist Party today is made up roughly, I'm going to get my numbers wrong, there's going to be people probably write in and they'll correct me on this, but there are roughly about 90 million party members, registered party members inside of China today. To have any real power inside of China, you have to be a Communist Party member. So to be a Communist Party member, you have to go through several steps of that. So you have the Young Pioneers, which you get exposed to in school. It's kind of like Boy Scouts for communists. So when you're a kid and you're going through school inside of China, you get exposed from the age of 3, you have to go through a moral classroom. And the moral classroom from the age of 3 years old. See, the Chinese atheists, or I should properly say atheists, because China didn't start this, right? They inherited it from the system that was started by the Russians, by the Soviet Union. And so in the Soviet Union knew that if you want to change the minds of people, you have to start with the children. And so what they did was they made it mandatory already from the age of 3 years old for children to study all of the great things about communism and atheism. So you start to study the Karl Marx theory. And they did the same thing inside China. They do the same thing in China. And as you grow up in China, you become a part, or you can join into this Young Pioneers group. And the Young Pioneers group is mainly signified by one thing for students, and that is a red scarf. So young students wear this red scarf, and this red scarf signifies that they are a young pioneer for the Communist Party. And one of the things that we often notice when it comes to those that want to go into certain colleges, those that want to get their education paid for in the West, those that would like to get into positions of power, they have to become a Communist Party member. And one of the things that we hear when we look at, or we hear about the Communist Party, we mainly hear about how the government is doing, A, B, and C. But we don't really know too much about what it takes to become a member of the government or to be promoted in the government system. And one of the things that I want to share during this time, when I'm looking at this congressional meeting that's taking place at the Great Hall of the People at the west of Tiananmen Square, is to pray for these individuals, because many of them have been born into the slavery of atheism. Many of them have been born into the slavery of atheism. How will they know if they've never heard the gospel? From the age of 3 years old, these children are being indoctrinated with the idea that there is no loving God. From the very young age of 3, these party members are being taught that the early missionaries, and this is so important when looking at the situation with the when we're looking at the situation inside of China right now. One of the things that we notice is that if the people have not heard the gospel, then they've heard the gospel of the Communist Party. And the Communist Party gospel is that they protected the people from the killers that were missionaries, the occupiers that were missionaries, individuals that were sent by colonial governments. I can remember in the very early ages applying for my China visa, going into the visa office, picking up, they had like these little booklets, like little information tracts. They used to have them there in Hong Kong at the main office for when you applied for your visa. And I had to apply for a visa every time. It depended on what the situation was for the US government and the Chinese government. When the situation was good, I could get like a 6-month or even, an entire year visa, tourist visa into China. Now I've got a 10 years, so I'm very thankful for that. But before, especially when in the early 2000s, when a spy plane from the United States crashed into Hainan Island, I mean, they shut down all visas. And if you wanted to apply for a visa at that time, every time I went into China, I had to apply for a visa. And if I lived in China, it was very, very difficult getting my resident visa. I've got a couple questions that have just popped up from Missions Pulse. This is my good friend David, I'm assuming, from Thailand. He said, why don't we hear any of this supposed secretive info about the China government in Western mainstream media? That's a really good question. I think some of it might be just complicated. Maybe we kind of do, but it's just complicated. Maybe Westerners don't really, if I start talking about how the Chinese government is made, how many people will listen to my news broadcast? I think a lot more people would much rather listen to a killer bee that is about ready to invade your garden. I think a lot more people would rather listen to a locker room talk with a presidential candidate that was really seedy and really bad, rather than hear a boring speech about what the history of the Chinese government is. Missions Pulse also writes, does the present day red scarf not carry negative connotations in China after the horrific Cultural Revolution tales? There are. So this is a big challenge. David, who's writing this, I'm assuming he's lived in the same city that I've lived in Western China. When you go and you work in many of those schools, it is mandatory for those children to wear those scarves. So when I would go into the schools and hand out, for about 6 years, I carried out the Back to Jerusalem, worked together with Samaritan's Purse in the United States, and I carried out all of the Samaritan's Purse with Franklin Graham. I carried out all of his operations inside of China. So for 6 years, I delivered hundreds of thousands of shoebox gifts throughout China. So I went from school to school to school to school, delivering these hundreds of thousands of gifts. We also built over 100 schools in the rural areas of Sichuan, Yunnan, Qinghai, Tibet, Xinjiang, building more than 100 primary schools. And so this is one of the reasons I know about these moral classrooms, is because we had to build them. We had to build the moral classrooms for the Chinese communist schools. It was mandatory that we build an extra classroom that would not be used for children to study any other subject except for communism. And so they had to, whenever they had a special celebration, so they didn't necessarily wear the red scarves if they didn't have to. But on the days that I was there, you had the biggest officials from the area coming into the school, because it was all official. Across the board, I was working directly with the government officials in many different provinces at the highest levels. The party secretary was usually with me. We would drive to the different schools and deliver these boxes. So when the party secretary comes to your school, you better darn well have your red scarf on as a pioneer. But yeah, there are, especially when you get into more Western areas of China, there are a lot of bad connotations that go along with that red scarf because of the pain of the Cultural Revolution, but not just Cultural Revolution. There are areas in Western China that still see the Han Chinese as occupiers. I mean, right now we see about 1.5 million, or that's the general accepted number right now across the board for most experts when it comes to the number of Uyghurs, Western Muslims inside of China that are in re-education camps. Basically, I mean, they're a lot nicer. These re-education camps are a lot nicer than what they were in the 1960s and 70s inside of China, but they're still camps. They are still detention facilities that are taking people against their will to go and relocate, to be re-educated into the Communist Party system. Well, it's not just adults, and it's not just Muslims. There are also Christians that have been detained and put into these re-education camps in Western China, mainly in Xinjiang. And one of the things that we see is that we have children. Right now, the general accepted number, nobody really knows, right? But the general accepted number, and a lot of this information, when I'm giving you numbers, is taken from eyewitness accounts, general agreement up on satellite feeds on being able to see materials moving in and out of different areas, like how many tons of food. We know generally what it takes to sustain, 1.5 million people. Can it be exaggerated? Yes, there could be much fewer than 1.5 million. We do know that there are hundreds of thousands. Like I said, the general numbers, I'm just going to throw that out there. It could be less, could be more. This generally accepted, there's been about 3 million people who have moved through those camps, 1.5 million still there. Out of that 1.5, you have 1/3 of those are children under the age of 18. So about 500,000, 500,000 occupants at these re-education camps are children under the age of 18 that are being re-educated with this mantra of communism is good, there is no God. And that's the big deal here. I don't want to dive too much into the politics of communism, but I'm forced to because communism and atheism are inseparable. The two of them go hand in hand because that was the theory of Karl Marx. That the whole system is based on the idea that everybody is as good as their output and that there is no God. And actually God, the idea of God, is the opiate of the masses. It's what people have used throughout the generations to control those that are at the bottom, to control those that were the worker force, the worker bees. So those that were at the top echelon, they were the ones controlling the masses by using religion over their head. And one of the things that we see about these congressional delegates that are coming in from the Western areas, they're not always that well accepted. So it's kind of like, okay, Eastern China, Eastern Seaboard, and Middle China, the heartland of China. When I say heartland, I'm talking about the Yellow River, Henan, Hunan, Hubei, Anhui. This is the heartland of China. This is the farmland. These are the gritty Han Chinese. But once you start moving into Western China, you start moving into different people groups that they speak a different language. They have different culture. They have different background, different history. As you start moving west, you get people that like the Chinese, Han Chinese, less and less. And so for those children to wear that red scarf around their neck is hard for the child because it's hard for the parents. The parents have bad feelings towards the Han Chinese because they see them as occupiers. That's why I bring up the whole situation in Xinjiang. And so what they have is this headstrong focus on the Chinese being bad, bad people. And that red scarf signifies that. Well, these individuals from the 31 different districts, the 31 different provinces inside of China are all coming together in Beijing, and they're together right now. So when you ask the question, who are they? Who are the people that make up the Communist Party? It's about 90 million people from 31 different provinces that make up this government control people group of all of China. That wasn't a very good explanation, was it? These are the people that run China. You have this censor of command, which is Beijing. The very, very center, the very inside cream of the inside of the chocolate, that is President Xi. And then everything branches out from there into the different provinces. And then the individuals that represent the Communist Party are sent out to the different provinces and they run the provinces from the top. These guys have come together in Beijing and they are the ones that need your prayer. Now, this is a highly secretive meeting. Everybody knows that it's going on. So it's not secretive in that nobody's supposed to know that it's going on. I mean, I'm telling you about it and I'm sitting in Stockholm. All right, so it's not that secretive. It's all over the news. You can do any of this research. When I say secret, what I mean is that this is a Communist Party closed door meeting. The members come together in private, in secret, highly secure. You cannot see what takes place behind the curtain of Oz. How the decisions are made, how the decisions are debated, you do not see. What you do see is a big, beautiful photo op that you can actually see on my screen right now. So if you look at the screen, you can see the 13th NPC, National People's Congress, picture from Beijing as it looks from the official photographer. Taking pictures. This is what you'll get. You're not going to get C-SPAN, where you get to hear the different members get up and say different things. What they will have is press conferences. But those are not real press conferences. At the end of each day, what you'll see is the spokesperson come out and speak to the news organizations, which are all officiated by the government. My good friend at Missions Pulse, you guys are, they're making fun of my speaking. The center cream of the chocolate is President Xi. Yes, I don't always get my examples correct or right or that I am trying to describe ideas and I try to use analogies that fall on their face in the mud and get me in the weeds more than what it would have been if I just stayed away from analogies altogether. But I'm still going to use analogies because that's how I think, that's how I communicate. And even if I fail, give me another chance. I will come back. I will come up with another analogy that will be at least a little bit closer to the point that I was trying to make. President Xi being the center cream of the chocolate may not have actually been the best analogy, but it was closer. I was circling in. Here's the thing about speaking different languages. When you speak different languages, you don't always know the exact word that you're looking for. So what happens is you circle around the word long enough until you kind of get close to it. So I may not have the vocabulary to say a lot of things in Chinese, but I can say anything that I want in Chinese. Because I have developed the art of circling around what I mean until I finally zoom in close enough for you to understand. And if you understand, then I have communicated. And that's the purpose of language, to effectively communicate. And so I may not, listening to me might be the same as watching a one-legged drunk man cross an icy street in the middle of winter. It's not going to be fun. You're going to hurt for me. You are going to actually feel sorry for me at the end of my explanation. But if you understand that I have effectively communicated, when I speak Swedish in front of my wife cringes for me. She cringes for me. She cringes for me when I speak English. But she cringes for me because I butcher the language so much. And I do the same thing in Chinese. So when I am looking for an example, I may not find the most appropriate analogy, but stay with me. When we're looking at the day-to-day meetings of this Chinese Congress, what you hear is someone that comes out and speaks, and everything that he says has been ordained by the powers that be inside the Communist Party. So when he leaves those holy chambers of this 10,000 seat People's Hall, they come out and speak in front of reporters that are also a part of the Communist Party. These are not independent reporters. Okay, this is not ABC, BBC, CNN, Australian national news. These are not individuals that are actually trying to find out what happened. They're trying to find out, what are we supposed to say? And they're given their bullet points on the briefing of the meetings that took place during the day. So when we listen to the news coverage of these meetings, know that the only people that really knows what's going down are those that are inside, and those that know don't talk, and those that talk don't know. So when I'm sharing with you about what I think is happening inside of these chambers, I don't really know. I only have history to go off of where I've seen the Communist Party in the past, and the information that I'm trying. So anybody that knows me or has been around me long enough or has even met with my wife, you'll know that I wake up every morning. It's part of my routine. Wake up every morning, whatever time, anywhere between 4 and 6. So wake up between 4 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Usually that's my routine. The very first thing I do is I just start scouring through the news every single day. The reason I do that is because it is important for me to understand what's happening in the world, to be able to prepare for our mission work that is taking place in the most sensitive, volatile, dangerous regions of the world today. It helps out tremendously to know what is happening in the world today. So one of the things that we have is that the people that are inside of these meetings are not authorized to share very publicly. On opening day, we had Premier Li Keqiang, who came out and he announced the key annual economic targets. This was a big deal for everybody, but I reported about this yesterday. We put this up on our website. They skipped, for the very first time since 1990, they skipped and did not discuss the budget for the year 2020. The reason why is because the economy inside of China is hurting badly. I mean, all of our contacts, all of our friends, everybody that is working as either a lawyer, factory worker, factory owner, business owner, we are seeing challenges across the board. And this is creating two things inside of China. These two things are very important because they are dictating the policy that is coming out. The very first thing that we see is fear. There is fear about the coronavirus. There is fear about the protests in Hong Kong. There's fear about the recognition that is taking place right now with Taiwan and the WHO. There's fear about the anti-Chinese sentiment that is on the rise in North America, Europe, and around the world. There's fear about factories that are shutting down and moving their supply chain to other areas because those factories are never coming back. You don't just try on new factories like a pair of pants. If you make the investment in building a new factory in a new area, chances are you're probably going to keep that factory in that new area unless it just becomes completely unviable in the next decade or two. So the very first thing that we see is fear. The second thing is anger. There's a lot of anger right now inside of China. There's a lot of anger because the Chinese greatly value loyalty. And they see that around the world, in places that they thought that they had friends, those friends are now speaking out against their handling of the coronavirus. That is unloyal. There is Taiwan. Many countries are now starting to gravitate towards Taiwan's argument for their entrance into the WTO. That is unloyal. They're seeing protests take place in Wuhan. Big protests, flipping over of police vehicles, protests on bridges. That is unloyal. Protests in Hong Kong that haven't even stopped with the coronavirus. That is unloyal. So there's this anger of lack of loyalty. There's this anger kind of underneath the surface. And a lot of that is being directed towards all things that are not Chinese. So there's this anti-foreign sentiment that is actually taking root inside of China. That's very dangerous. That's why we need to pray for this congressional meeting, that their steps be ordained and led by the Heavenly Father of love, peace, mercy, and grace, and not by the ruler of this world. One of the things that we see right now is that there is a lot of blame for the economy that is taking place. But one of the things that we see is that there is blame that is taking place because of the trade war. There's blame that is taking place because the U.S. is starting to get pretty aggressive economically on China. So for instance, Huawei, their major phone company inside of China that is trying to build deals in the UK, in Australia, in South Africa, in Canada, are facing resistance left, right, and center from the US, which is going after Huawei because basically they have laced their items that they've been selling around the world. They've been lacing them with information devices that allows the government even more of a vacuum to take it. And by the way, you might think that you're safe with a phone that is not Huawei. Most of the phones that are used around the world are made in China. So the chances of them being laced can be very, very high. This is one of the things that we see with Samsung, who has moved their production out of China into other nations, specifically Vietnam, which I've talked about in other podcasts in the past. This is a big deal. But even if you don't buy a phone that's made in China, that does not mean that your phone has not been compromised. Because there are a lot of software companies out there that are being run. One of the things that we're seeing with, like for instance, the founder of Alibaba. It took a long time for people to pull it out, and we knew it before he even admitted it, but he's a member of a Communist Party. The founder of Zoom, the more we learned about it Back to Jerusalem, the more we started being concerned about sharing information about what we're doing inside of China, because we are actually building up an intranet system right now where Christians can talk to one another. One of the things that people have been doing lately is joining our online social media service at dingdash.com. Dingdash.com is very, very basic. And a lot of people would like to see more things done with it, and we're doing more things. In fact, we just launched our app today. So if you want to download the Dingdash app, you can actually go online. I don't think it's available right now through the Apple App Store, but it is available through Google Play. So you can actually download the Dingdash app. But the reason I'm saying this is because the Dingdash app is being mainly put together for an intranet, not internet system. Meaning that we are setting up a system that we can use in nations that are closed from the outside. Nations like Yemen, nations like Iran, nations like North Korea, where they do not have, or they will not have in the future, access to outside internet. So we are creating an international system that, and I can't give too many details on this because it will give it away on how we transfer data, but we are creating the social media system for that environment. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is that even if you don't have a device that's made inside of China, even if you have software, TikTok, for instance, one of the big social media giants out there that the young people are just absolutely loving. This has been a massive vacuum for the Chinese to suck up data. And you may think that, well, my data, what does it matter? It matters a lot. This is why at Dingdash we make sure that people know that if you delete your account, it's deleted, it's gone. We don't save anything. We don't share any of your information with the government. We don't keep any of your information to share it with the government. So we don't sell anything, we don't use anything. We allow you the freedom to share your thoughts. We don't monitor, we don't police. We've set it up specifically for Christians that are living in closed countries, but anybody can use it. And this just came out. One of the reasons I want to bring this up, though, that even if your device is not made in China, it can still be laced with software that sends information to the Communist Party, which is a big deal for them. And so the US has been taking steps to block a lot of that influence that China's had for a while. And so this is becoming the root of anger against the international community. So if you are from the Netherlands, if you are from South Africa, or if you are from Poland and you travel to China and people see that you are light complexion, they're probably going to think you're from America and you're going to be blamed as American even if you're not an American. My wife went through that her entire life. She's from Sweden, grew up in Taiwan, and everywhere she went, everybody called her American. She used to correct them in the beginning, but after a while she just started to accept it. That no matter, you can't get over it. If you look like you're an American, people just assume that you're an American. So you're going to be blamed for things that your country didn't have anything in doing. Yeah, you're welcome. Congratulations, you're welcome. One of the things that we see with China right now and their economy is that there's going to be a lot of eyes on these meetings. And when you hear about these meetings, I promise you most of it will probably be about the economy. But there's a bigger part to these meetings for the NPC that during these parliamentary meetings in China. And that is China is expected to pass their first civil code. This is a big deal. And when you hear the word civil code, you might think, well, you know what, this is a good term. What this really means is that China will start to, legislate in laws that will help individual rights. Just really quick, I saw that another question came up from Mission Pulse. Sorry, Mission Pulse, what I'm doing is I'm looking at a screen, and so sometimes all of the questions that you've asked or some of your the things that you've written doesn't always show up, but what you've just written says, is Huawei just a scapegoat? Why so little fuss about Zoom, TikTok, and other companies that provide the China government access to our data? I personally don't think that Huawei is a scapegoat. I think that they are, I'm not saying that they're doing nefarious activities, but I do think they have the potential to. And here's the reason why. By law, any company that's based inside of China, even if they don't want to. So I'm not saying that Zoom was nefarious from the very beginning. I'm not saying that TikTok was nefarious from the very beginning. So the Jewish position is to give the benefit of the doubt to the accused and to assume that the accused had the right motives. And that is the position that I want to take with Huawei, Zoom, TikTok, that the motives were good, even if the actions were dangerous. I hope that makes sense. And so I think that the main motive, personally, this is me personally, I personally think that the main motive behind Huawei, TikTok, Zoom is to make money, and lots of it, as fast as humanly possible. That's the goal of most companies. And good on you. That's the free market. That's what you're supposed to do if you're starting a company. But when you see military individuals move into Huawei, when you know that the laws inside of China dictate information collected by groups like Zoom and TikTok and WeChat and Alibaba, their first primary service to the community is to the Communist Party. Because the Communist Party is the people. That's why they call it the People's Republic of China. It's the people's. It's the people's country. Right? I mean, whenever people say it belongs to the people, that's usually the first sign that it doesn't belong to the people. If you're from America and you're listening to this, the government basically owns the National Postal Service, right? The post office. How much control do you have over the post office, really? You have absolutely, they don't go in there and complain about your package not arriving. Go in there and complain about your package being delayed. Go in there and complain about your package being damaged. They're not going to give a rip. You're going to get bad service for a bad price. That's just the way it's going to be. And what the beauty about it is you can look at other companies and see which one is going to rip you off the least. That's kind of what you try to do in a free market. You try to look, okay, they're all trying to get something for nothing. They're trying to make profit, and that I'm a part of that equation. So how can I get ripped off the least? Inside of China, profit is not your first motive. That's not your first duty. Your duty is to the country first and foremost. And whenever you start mixing in nationalism, even in the United States, you see the same thing. We've seen it especially during this epidemic. Ford has, you have to start making face masks or whatever. Tesla, you have to start making breathing apparatuses. 3M, you have to start making N95, whatever it is. Your duty is to country first, all right? So China's not unique in that, but they are unique in using it during peacetime. That's why companies that do not submit information to the communist government are not allowed to operate inside of China. So one of the things that we're seeing right now with this Congress, and I'm coming up on my last 10 minutes, so I want to kind of wrap this up, and I haven't even really dived fully into what I wanted to talk about. Unfortunately, even though I've done live broadcasts in the past for a couple hours at a time, today I have to keep it. I have another appointment today, so I have to keep it short. It's one of the reasons why I've traveled down to the main capital city of Sweden. Otherwise, it's like about 6 hours from my home to drive down to Stockholm. But I had meetings down here, so I had to drive down. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the big city. I would rather stay in the middle of nowhere where I feel the most comfortable. So I have to end this in actually 9 minutes now. But I do want to talk about this. That means that all calls I'll basically have to shut down for the rest of this time. So my Skype is being closed out. I'm closing that right now. So if you didn't get a chance to call, I apologize for that. I'm going to take that number off, and I'm just going to end this podcast with telling you about the prayer essentials that are necessary as we look at the NPC meetings. And that is, they are putting together a civil code. And I believe that the civil code might greatly impact religious freedom in China. We've already seen something else that's impacting religious freedom, and that is that China was basically just appointed to be the head, the biggest country in charge of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. The United Nations Human Rights Commission, which usually points out human rights are being violated by different countries around the world, whether it's freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Those human rights that are supposed to be protected and highlighted by the United Nations Human Rights Commission is now being run by China. China is now in charge of appointing those that do the investigation into nations that violate human rights. This is a massive responsibility put into the hands of a huge violator. So now China is coming out with this civil code, which is basically outlining individual rights that will be legislated. And when you hear about civil code and individual rights being legislated inside of China, that sounds like a great thing. Basically what this civil code does is it makes it easier to get a divorce. It makes it easier to sue for sexual harassment. It's expected, these new civil laws are expected to spell out the clear boundaries between government and individual. But is it a good thing? Will this civil code give people more human rights in China? The short answer is no. Not even close. This is not a code that will actually limit government intrusion against civilians, but rather it's more of a code that determines the rights between two arguing bodies in civil disputes. But even though this civil code covers mainly civil disputes, it also will help increase legislation for the rights of the government against seizure of assets from individuals by the state. More important, what rights the government has over companies and individual property owners. This is a massive piece of legislation that's going to be going through in the next couple of days, and we as Christians have to pray over this. The draft code consists of about 1,260 articles, including general provisions and sections on property, contracts, personal rights, marriage, family, inheritance, and tort reform. Basically, the different laws that are covered in this civil law, this civil code that's being written, is broken down into contractual law, marriage law, succession law, adoption law, guarantee law, property law, and tort law. Now, I'm going to do an article about this tomorrow, and I'll put up the direct link to the npc.gov.cn. This is where I got my information. I went through and I painfully read through most of it. Didn't understand what half of it said, to be honest with you. I didn't see anything that was blaringly against Christians, and I pray that is the case. There were a couple things where I stopped and reread again to see if I fully understood, because it did seem to lean towards an area that would involve imposing on the rights of Christians. Again, that website, you can go and find it out right now. You can look at civil law in China, www.npc, National People's Congress, www.npc.gov.cn, npc.gov.cn. This has been something that China's been trying to pass for years. They've been trying to pass, they started back when Mao first took over. In 1949, they put together a civil code that was put forth before the NPC Standing Committee in 1954. I had to go all the way back to 1954 to actually find the very first time that a civil code was presented, but it did not pass. It was only a draft. And after 2 years in the NPC of debates, real debates, which don't take place anymore, and I'll tell you just really quick why that's important. NPC, the debates do not take place anymore. But there were debates in 1954. Think about that. Think about how things have changed. Think about how much power President Xi currently has. That there are no debates that are actually real debates in the NPC, but there were during the days of Mao Zedong. You thought he was a dictator. President Xi has power that Mao Zedong only dreamed of having. Okay, so after 2 years of debates, fights, theories, the panel finally completed a first draft of a civil code that did not pass. It was basically based on an old civil code that was done by the Soviet Union in 1922, and the draft reflected some of those social circumstances in China at the time of 1954, but it never passed. And it came back again, and then in 2017, this is the same time that the code against Christians was brought forth to the NPC and passed. This is the reason why I'm watching this closely, because I talked about this in 2017. In 2018, 2019, we saw the full impact of these new religious laws that came downrange. This is the same time the civil code was being constructed. Now that they've had these new religious laws in place for 2 years, now the Chinese can see what to put in this civil code. Here's the thing. This will go to a vote before the National People's Congress. But it's not a real vote. This is not a vote in a democracy to find out if it passes or not. It will pass. Whatever is presented will pass. It is a vote to find out who are the loyalists to be recognized for promotion and who are the traitors that are dissidents and need to be pointed out and then weeded out. Votes always follow the Communist Party's wishes, and they generally pass by an overwhelming majority. When I say overwhelming, I'm talking 98-0 or 98, to 1. One abstaining or one missing, something like that. These are not real votes. Think about this. In 2012, when President Xi came to power, there were a lot of people that did not agree with him. All of those individuals that were not in his camp are now gone. From 2012, once he was appointed, then started this anti-corruption campaign. You can go and look this up online. The anti-corruption campaign basically went after people that embezzled money from the Communist Party, which is everybody. Everybody. In fact, President Xi is probably one of the most wealthiest people in the world. Right now, his estimated wealth is about $1.5 billion. We actually don't know how much, but it's about $1.5 billion. There's about 800 billionaires inside of China. All of them are Communist Party members. And those that are not are paying Communist Party members. 1/3 of that 800 billionaires inside of China are actually standing members of the NPC, the National People's Congress. And when this anti-corruption campaign came sweeping through China, one of the things that we saw is that everybody that was named in these books there's this guy by the name of Mr. Gui. He's from China, but he's a Swedish citizen. He's now he's been arrested inside of China. He's been held inside of China. But he wrote about 200 books in a period of about 10 years. He was a writing fool, and he was accurate. His sources. He was a part of the Causeway Bay Bookstore 5. All of these guys that had this bookstore in Causeway Bay are now gone, missing, or in prison. They're either dead or in prison. And Mr. Gui was one of the most effective people at writing these books. And everybody that he wrote about ended up going down in this anti-corruption campaign. His latest book never got published. And that was President Xi and His Six Mistresses. Once that book, even though the wind of that book got out, he was arrested. He was actually secretly kidnapped from his home in Thailand. We actually followed it several years ago when it took place. And once he was kidnapped, he was taken back to China, and he's been held in China ever since then. His daughter's been a big advocate for him. Here's what I want you to know and pray about. And that is, as this civil code is voted on, and we're going to follow it very closely. I'm going to follow every single news source that I can and take it apart and dig through it and listen to other colleagues out there who's commenting on this. So if you have any information about the civil code, I would love to hear from you as I tried to pick it apart and study it. But the civil code could be one of the most important pieces of legislation in the last 70 years as it pertains to Christians in China. It might absolutely be nothing. And we pray that it won't be anything that will harm the Chinese, but it will be something that helps the Chinese. So please join us. Please join us in prayer as we pray for our brothers and sisters with the Underground House Church. And if we join our brothers and sisters in praying for the Underground House Church, the Underground House Church supports their government. They pray for their officials. They pray for their president. And I join them in that prayer. I pray for President Xi. I pray for the leaders. I pray for the Chinese people. There was a black cloud. I'm going to end on this. I just did a report. It's on our website. You can find it on our website. If you go to backtojerusalem.com, it's on our main page there on Thursday. And I've had this confirmed by our friends inside of Beijing. As the people moved in from all around the country, from the different provinces of China, to begin to enact these new laws, a dark cloud, supernatural dark cloud moved in with them. In the middle of the day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Beijing went dark. It was like looking at the city at midnight. Dark clouds rolled in. The sun couldn't be seen. There was a thick blackness throughout the entire city. Could have been a coincidence, just a weather front. But I believe that we are up against spiritual powers of darkness that have come to enact new laws and to persecute the church in China. Why? Because the word of Christ is being spread like never before inside of China. And they have a vision to take the good news of Jesus Christ into the regions of the world that have never heard the good news of Jesus Christ before. And the enemy cannot, will not sit down on the sidelines while this takes place. They have to fight. Their survival depends on it. Because once the gospel is spread to all the people groups, the enemy's time is done. It's up. And his eternal damnation will begin. The longer the enemy can keep the gospel from getting into the unreached areas of the world, the longer he can prolong his time on this earth. So if you think that this end time mission is going to be a cakewalk, you're wrong. Christ promised the exact opposite. We will face persecution. We will face opposition. We will face death. But I've read the end of the book. The good news is we win. We win if we are on the side of Christ. If Christ lives in us, who can be against us. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support. And I thank you for all of you that joined us for this live Back to Jerusalem podcast. I pray that it was a blessing for you, and I pray that it helps you to understand how to pray for China and her believers and her missionaries when you are in your prayer closet. Thank you so much. God bless.